Well, that was great. Before I introduce Christine Spang, I want to underscore something that Manish said, that he kind of said in passing, and we're all saying it in passing. He was talking about AI agents briefly, and obviously his business is essential for providing the data that AI agents can use to be effective. But think about that. He said, rapid adoption of AI agents. This is not just adding new software. We're literally talking about adding new capabilities that are sort of increasingly becoming like adding new people, except they're artificial. So in a way, this rapid adoption of AI agents is becoming sort of like hiring. It will sort of be like you deciding what talent to hire for jobs and for interacting with customers, for doing analytics, for, I don't know, creating slides for Web Summit. It's sort of like you're hiring people when you're hiring AI agents. Talk about a mess for HR, but an opportunity for all of us. So with that, I'd like to transition now to a session where we're going to explore, well, chatbots are cool, but can AI do more? With Christine Spang, the CEO and founder of Nylas. Christine, welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Web Summit. How y'all doing? Woo! Yeah. It's day 2. Everyone enjoying Lisbon? It's a beautiful city. We've had really nice weather. The food is amazing. And, I think the vibe at Web Summit is always something that I find really great. There's a lot of energy here, a lot of information about what is the latest and greatest that's happening in tech, and it's just fun to be here. So I'm happy to be here, and I hope that you all are too. So as was introduced previously, my talk is about GenAI. But first, just a little bit about my perspective and my company. So I run a company called Nylas. We are an API platform that makes it really easy for developers to connect to the data in email, contacts, and calendars. These are really important business communication channels. Email is sort of where a lot of work gets done. Calendars is where meetings get scheduled. And all of this data is this huge repository of unstructured data that people want to connect to other applications. And we are the API platform that provides drop-in components, easy-to-use APIs that make that really easy. We have over 1,000 customers that are using the platform to build all sorts of applications. Many of them are in sort of the business productivity space, but we also have use cases sort of across the spectrum. People also use our APIs to automate workflows, and that's something that I'm sure you've been hearing a lot of about in the context of AI, where people want to bring in data, they want to personalize, they want to build models with that data, and then they want to use that to automate things and make the work for the humans who are making the decisions a lot easier. So that's a little bit about what we do. Now I want to talk a little bit about AI. If you've been here before, or if you've been to any other event in the last couple of years, you know that we've been on this crazy wave with regard to AI, and the latest development being generative AI. I remember when ChatGPT came out in, I think it was fall of 2022, and all the headlines around that time were basically saying that, like, in the next 6 months, all developers are going to lose their jobs, and we're going to automate all of these positions out of existence, and the robots are about to take over. That's pretty normal. That happens during any sort of new technology hype cycle where, there was a new advance that came out. We saw a big leap in capabilities. People's minds were really blown by, what those capabilities were and sort of how lifelike it seemed. But then it's really normal for, over the past 2 years, people played around with the tech. They started finding the limitations, and people also threw a ton of money at this space. And I think that one thing that is really common is that folks will have sky-high expectations. They'll throw a lot of money at it, but unless you're really focused on teasing out what are the use cases that work, your expectations end up not being met. So we kind of go through this trough, and I would say that we're close to the bottom of the trough today, where over the last 6 months, there have been a lot of headlines around like, oh, did we move too fast? Were our expectations too high? Did we spend too much money on this? Is it all just sort of a fad? And at the end of the day, all of these new technology hype cycles end up converging on value. And that's the result of this process where, technologists all around the world try out the new technology, they try using it in different use cases, and eventually we figure out what works and is useful, and then what things it's just not the right fit for. And so the business ROI starts to be something comes out. Places where you can deploy this technology, in this case generative AI, and get more value out of it than money that you're putting in. And then we sort of discard, as a distributed group of people figuring this out, what doesn't work, or things that are just too expensive to make sense. The way that I think about AI is really in the context of computing as a whole. If you think back, on how computing has developed over really like 50 plus years at this point, it's always been about generating more leverage for people. Starting out with calculating machines, where a computer could do more math faster than any person could ever do, and that's what enabled us to do things like get to space in the 70s, to put a man on the moon. And it's really exciting to me to see that focus on leverage really continue as the technology, including AI, has brought us new capabilities. How I see AI is that it's the use of computational learning models to generate this leverage. And as I mentioned before, it's a tool set. AI is a broader space than just generative AI, but this generates leverage for specific use cases. What are those use cases? The places that generate positive ROI for generative AI today are a few different things. Chatbots were kind of the original thing that took generative AI mainstream, and this is something that I think makes a lot of sense. There's actually a lot of tools and startups out there that you can kind of off-the-shelf plug a bunch of documentation or sort of internal documents, things like that, and you can get a chat interface that a lot of people find better and easier to use than traditional search. The way that I see this is that this is because not everybody out here in the world reads books. And documentation is kind of like reading a book. Everyone knows how to read for the most part, but not everybody reads books every day. But what we all do is we talk to other people every day. And this is sort of the primary interface that we're used to having as a way to get information and discover things and figure it out. A lot of people learn things and think out loud by talking. And chatbots were this great leap forward in that they brought that interface to the way that we interface with digital information. Same applies to things like knowledge bases. You can put your sort of internal documentation, company documents, things like that, into a large language model-based system and get a chat-based interface, or just be able to search and use it. And then I think another use case that probably many people in this room are familiar with is coding assistance. The reason that this is something that has had early fit is because it's easy to use it in a targeted way where you don't have to put a large task at it. It's something that's verifiable because code is something that you run it and it either works or it doesn't. And it adapts really well to having this kind of human-in-the-loop type workflow. And that's really important because right now, the technology is not so advanced that you can throw a big sort of unspecified task at it and expect that it will just sort of work out. The operator, needs to really understand what are the capabilities of the technology and then sort of give it bite-sized tasks that it can help out with and make that person overall more effective. This is just a quick little example of sort of a chatbot in action. We launched this, I think it was last year. It's basically a chatbot for our developer documentation, and it's something that actually reduced our support tickets by 30%, because people can more easily find what they needed in essentially like the dictionary or the reference manual. There's a lot of companies that allow you to do this kind of off the shelf pretty easily. It's pretty cool. So where are we going from here? What I want to talk about is communications data. So my company works a lot with some really important channels that contain communication data. And communication is one of the most fundamental and important things about how we work together as humans. Meetings, documents, messages back and forth, emails. This is how work gets done and how people collaborate in large groups in the modern world. And being able to connect this communications data to other applications and to pull out sort of the structured essence of it is something that is really powerful. What people are doing with this communications data, and what I've seen lots of teams all sort of throughout the world experimenting in different use cases, is you want to access data that's really relevant. I'm talking about communications data here, and without having that context accessible for models, accessible to just sort of show all in the same place as all the other information that you need to get something done, you can't have the machine suggest things that are relevant. We want to use tools that make us more effective as people. We want to use tools that make it so that we can accomplish things that are either bigger than we could alone, or that we can get done faster with that tool than we could on our own. And by customizing the data and pulling in customized context, structuring that data, we're able to build applications that are less general, that can suggest more specific actions, and that just generally are more useful. One of the things that's really important about how generative AI technology goes into production these days is that people aren't just taking this technology and building a model and then putting that in production and having a specific use case, call the model and generate the right output. In order to make something that's useful at the end of the day, people are gluing multiple components together. They are using large language models for some tasks. They're putting guardrails on it for safety. They're using traditional software engineering techniques to transform the inputs and the outputs and to connect it to other pieces of production systems. And then we also need to create feedback loops so that we can see and evaluate what are good outputs and what are bad outputs. And all of this requires traditional software engineering, a lot of work that's not just sort of throwing that base technology at a problem and having it work. There's a really cool, I guess it's actually a paper, but there's a more accessible blog post, which I have as a link here, that sort of introduces this concept of componentized systems that are compound. And I recommend taking a look at it if it's something that you're interested in. It shows sort of what is the state of the art today in putting large language models and generative AI in production. I've talked a bit about structuring communications data. What does that actually look like? What we've had to do for all of computing history up until today is have people figure out what the structure should be every time and define APIs so that computer systems can exchange that data and can make use of it. Large language models and generative AI give us a great leap forward in how we can structure data that's in the format that people use every day to communicate, which is typically unstructured, and to take that data and to turn it into data that is easier to connect between computing systems that exist today and to be used to personalize and to make those systems something that's even more relevant and useful for the end user. So this is just a little example that I actually generated with ChatGPT. And you can see that, the way that a traditional machine learning system would work for this particular task is you'd have a bunch of different examples, and then you'd have people go through them, and they would identify, what are the things that we want to extract, and then they would label all of these examples, and then you would run it through a learning process that would essentially pattern match based off of all of that labeled data. One of the great leaps forward of generative AI is that you can really sidestep and accelerate that process by having the computer do the labeling for you. And then, there's a bunch of different techniques that need to be applied in order to make sure that the quality is still there, but it's still something that's 10 or 100 times better than the process where you had to have this really manual, labor-intensive process of data labeling that was really a lot more restrictive. And because generative AI is these huge models that are trained on such a large corpus of essentially unstructured communications data, they are quite effective at digging in on what is the context of any sort of given sequence of words and patterns. So it's something that works pretty well. In order to do this in production at large scale, you still have to create a compound system that does more than just sort of throws this data at generative AI. But in my view, this is something that is really powerful, that allows us to connect information that's in the format that is made for people to information that's in the format that is made for machines. This is going to be revolutionary. My company is doing this for the communications channels that we connect to. This is an example. We just launched this product, Extract AI, today, which is basically a compound system that makes use of large language model technology under the hood, but we've also sort of built end-to-end processes with quality and optimize things at scale so that it's something that can process millions of messages for a very, very small cost. And this is an example of one capability. It supports extracting e-commerce data from email messages, which is something that a lot of our customers use for essentially putting that data into other systems to personalize experiences, to power features of their applications. We're also about to launch travel support for this as well. All right, so I talked about a bunch of stuff here, and wanted to just take a minute to wrap things up before I'm done. So, like I talked about in the beginning, we're in a hype cycle around generative AI right now. We've gone through the peak of inflated expectations. We're making our way through the trough today. And eventually, in the next couple of years, we're going to have a consensus around the techniques and the use cases where this technology is something that drives really positive ROI. And I think it's really exciting that there's so many different use cases out there that the startup world is really what is driving that convergence on value. Another thing we talked about was communications context. There's tons of really valuable information that's locked up in this unstructured communications data. If we can pull that context into other applications and structure it, we can use that to customize models. We can use it to suggest more relevant actions and make our software and tools something that drives more human productivity at the end of the day. And the last point was really about structuring that contextual data, which I think I've already talked about a bit, but again, you don't just sort of throw the data at the model. It's more complicated than that. You need to have traditional software engineering techniques. You need to have a feedback loop around quality, and most production quality generative AI systems that you interact with today that are useful are compound systems. They're not something that's just throw that data at the model and give it back. They have a lot more thought and structure and engineering that goes into making that system work. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for listening. If you want to learn more about Nylas, this QR code will take you to our website, or you can also just type in the letters the old-fashioned way. Thank you so much.